Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Keene, and I am the National President of the Ladies Ancient Order of Hibernians. Currently, I am located in Albany, New York, where we are freezing. I would like to thank everyone who is attending and participating in today's webinar on the personal experiences of a person of the day of the Bloody Sunday Massacre. I would like to ask that you visit our website, www.ladiesaoh.com, for more information about the wonderful work of our organization and our brother and sister organizations. I also would like to thank the Government of Ireland for their Immigrant Support Program grant that enables us to bring you this webinar as part of a series of our Embracing Our History. With the commercials over, I would now like to introduce our National Treasurer, Sandra Swift, who will be the moderator for today's event. And thank you very much for attending and participating.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you everyone for joining us today. This is our first of the Embracing Our Heritage webinars for 2022. The reason we're not doing this on January 30th is originally we were supposed to have several of our members who put this video together, these Zoom meetings, on the Freedom for All Ireland trip. However, that has been now postponed to April. At this time, I would like to introduce Matt Morrison. Matt grew up in the Brandywell, Derry, Ireland. At the age of 16, he accompanied his father and his cousin to the Civil Rights March, unknowing how the day was going to unfold. So this is his memories and his personal story. So please welcome at this time, and I thank him, Matt Morrison.
Good morning, everyone. Gom falcha Rove Golier. I just want to say off the bat that I would like to thank Karen and the National Board of the Ladies Ancient Order of Hibernians for the opportunity to participate in this webinar today. I would like to thank all of you for looking in on it, because collectively we are remembering with sadness, and we are bearing witness at the same time to what happened on that day, Bloody Sunday, the 30th of January, 1972, I'm sorry. I would like to do some house cleaning before I actually start here. Bloody Sunday on itself is a freestanding event, horrific, terrible, sad. But for those of you that don't have any firm grasp on the events of the 70s, the 80s, or the 90s in Ireland, I think it's important that, bearing in mind the educational element of this webinar, that I would like to backtrack and kind of set the scene for Bloody Sunday, because a failure to do that misses something that's very important. It all speaks to the deliberate nature of what happened on Bloody Sunday. Then I'll talk about my memories of participating in the march on Bloody Sunday. And then I would like to spend some time after that speaking on the effects of Bloody Sunday and what we went through as a consequence of Bloody Sunday. So most Americans, try as they might, do not really understand what it was like growing up in the north of Ireland as a Catholic, as a nationalist, or as a Republican. We were terribly discriminated against, and it's a consequence of that discrimination that the Northern Ireland Civil Rights Association was set up. The discrimination really had three elements. We were discriminated in the allocation of jobs, the allocation of housing, and we didn't have one person, one vote. Now, speaking personally, in the house that I grew up in, there was 4 adults. Only one had a vote, because property was linked. Sorry, the vote was linked to property, whether you rented or owned the property. So my grandmother was the only one that had a vote in our house. Now, growing up, my father because of discrimination in employment. Being a Catholic, he couldn't get a job in his own city. He had to go abroad and speak and work in Scotland, England, Wales, Holland, Belgium, Luxembourg. He was everywhere. So I grew up with my father traveling abroad most of the time. It was just not a good situation, to put it mildly. Now, the fact of the matter is that the civil rights campaign caused great problems for the Unionist regime in Stormont. And they beat us off the streets, frankly, every time we went on a march to protest, whether it was October the 5th, 1968, or all the marches that occurred up until the Battle of the Bogside in August of 1969. That's when Loyalists had their normal triumphalist parade through the city of Derry. Because of that, and the trouble that erupted around the march, the Orange March, the RUC reserves, the B specials, and loyalist mobs tried to invade the Bogside. And we, as a community, fought them, and we fought them to a standstill. With Molotov cocktails and stones, we fought the RUC with their armored cars and all their other paraphernalia of war. I say with some pride that my memory of that particular time was the fact that as we were making Molotov cocktails, there was women 60 and 70 years old making Molotov cocktails alongside of me. We would be inhaling gasoline fumes. We'd throw up, and we'd go back to making Molotov cocktails. I've never seen a period of time when a community came together the way the community in Derry came together during the Battle of Bogside. The importance of the Battle of Bogside is that's when the British Army came in to relieve the RUC. Women in Derry welcomed the British Army, ironically, and made them tea and just generally was glad that they showed up on the scene. But I recall the words of Bernadette Devlin McCalliskey, who warned us repeatedly, the British Army is not here to save you. The British Army is here to hold up the Unionist regime. They're here to protect the status quo. Well, we soon learned the reality of that, because the situation in Derry, Belfast, and various other places became militarized. We noticed, first of all, that the British Army was not stationed in loyalist areas. It was stationed in nationalist ghettos, Republican ghettos. Our daily life was barricades, sangers, soldiers everywhere, being stopped in the street, being frisked. And actually, in August the 9th, 1971, we saw the situation becoming worse when internment without trial was introduced. And of course, initially, everyone that was picked up and hauled off the interrogation centers where they were brutalized, and then hauled off to Long Kesh internment camp. They were primarily Catholic nationalists, some Republicans. The ludicrousy of that event is there was people who were interned without trial for the crime of being Irish teachers, and that's how bad the RUC intelligence was that they provided to the Brits. The internment swoops occurred under the AG of the Special Powers Act. The Special Powers Act was a repressive piece of legislation that even de Klerk, the Prime Minister of South Africa, spoke enviously about the Special Powers Act. They said they wish he had one element of the Special Powers Act That's how repressive that piece of legislation was. The Special Powers Act, which actually legally allowed for public flogging. And you know that living in the north the way we did, if anyone was flogged, it would be Catholics. It would not be anyone other than that. So all the way through August the 12th, we saw the British Army show their true really show their true colors in Ballymurphy and Belfast when they slaughtered 10 people, nine men and one woman. And actually one of the 9 men was a Roman Catholic priest. But that turned out, that was carried out by the 1st Battalion of the Parachute Regiment, the same battalion that would show up on Bloody Sunday and murder 13 of our people. It makes me sad thinking on what happened in Belfast, and it makes me make this point to you. When I speak about the situation in Derry, I'm speaking about the situation in Belfast. I'm speaking about Newry, Armagh, and various other places, because our people suffered the same reprehensible treatment from the RUC and from the British Army and all these areas. So now speaking personally, there was 2 things in 1971 that impacted me in a very personal manner. One was the shooting of a 14-year-old Derry schoolgirl, Annette McGavigan. Annette McGavigan was in her school uniform. She was eating an ice cream popsicle when a British soldier shot her in the back of the head and killed her stone dead. What's noticeable about this incident, apart from the obvious brutality and sadness of the killing, is the fact that the priest that gave her her last rites was Father Edward Daly, who subsequently would become the Bishop of Derry and who would be known for a very iconic picture on Bloody Sunday of him waving the handkerchief as he carried one of the people that was shot on Bloody Sunday towards an ambulance. The second thing was even more personal for me. My aunt, Kathleen Thompson, was shot dead in her own backyard by the British Army going into the Cregan. She was shot dead, and the salt that was added to the wound was that there was no real investigation into her death. And actually, as it turned out, the soldier that allegedly shot her dead said he had no memory of the event. The British Army brought their men in and told them exactly what they would say. The British Army, especially the Ministry of Defence, refused to release any documents pertinent to Kathleen's killing. And now, 50 years later, her family is still waiting on the results of a newly opened investigation inquest on their death. The British government has been non-cooperative in the death of Kathleen Thompson. But the point I want to stress here is, and I've talked about this on many occasions in the past, was the politics of the personal. It impacted me personally. It made me feel terrible. It made me see the British actions in the north of Ireland for what they were. They were designed plainly and simply to oppress us. They put us down, to silence us. So that was 1971. There was a lot of other things happened. The IRA started responding to the British. So things were starting to escalate. And then came 1972 and Bloody Sunday. There's a few things I would like to say about Bloody Sunday. Bloody Sunday was not an accident. It just didn't occur in its own. It wasn't paratroopers just went berserk, or it was very deliberate. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. So one of the things that came up on Bloody Sunday was the fact that the colonel of the paratroopers actually, and this came out in the Savile inquiry, never didn't follow orders that he was given by Brigadier McClellan, the British Army officer that was in charge of Derry. Wilford was a gung-ho, aggressive officer, and he was instructed not to follow the civil rights marchers into Russell Street, and he failed to follow that order. And he and his men went into Russell Street, and that's when the shooting began. But I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Now I would like to talk about my own personal involvement in Bloody Sunday. Before Bloody Sunday, I attended a lot of the civil rights demonstrations. Bloody Sunday was significant because we had another plank added to the civil rights issues that we had, and that was the introduction of internment without trial. My parents didn't know that I had attended the civil rights demonstrations prior to Bloody Sunday. So Bloody Sunday was the first demonstration that I attended with my father and my cousin, where I had the approval of my parents to be there. It was a sunny Sunday afternoon. I'll never forget it. When we walked up to the gathering point in the Craigan, it was chilly, but we were really heartened by the fact that there was so many people that actually showed up for the march. Somebody reckoned there was between 15,000 and 17,000 people who showed up for the demonstration, which is huge. It was huge because the population of Derry was about 80,000, 2/3 of which were Catholic. And so you can imagine that seeing such a large crowd in one spot was just breathtaking for all of us. So we set out and we sat down, we went down southway from the Craigan, down towards the Bogside, and we followed the truck which actually led the march. We were in good form. Everybody was in great form because the weather was pretty good. Everybody was just in good form because they were taking cues of each other. We just thought it would be a normal event. When we got down to the Bogside, to William Street, we were walking down by Stevenson's Bakery. And as we walked by the bakery, I saw a British soldier, a sniper, walking up the roof of the bakery. And I remember saying to my father, that looks like a sniper that's gone up on the roof. I wonder why he's there. And my father said, without thinking, he said, Matt, they couldn't shoot us all today. They wouldn't have enough bullets. There's so many of us here. Little did he know what was coming down the pike for us. Little did he know. So when we got to the bottom of William Street and Russell Street, we realized that the initial intent of the march was to walk towards the Guildhall, and we would assemble at the Guildhall, and the speakers would do their thing there. But the British Army had put up barricades and blocked us from doing that at the bottom of William Street. So at the last minute decision, the organizers of the march decided we would convene at Free Derry Corner. So all of us went round the corner off William Street onto Russell Street. We made our way to Free Derry Corner, and people started talking. Bernadette Devlin was there, Eamon McCann, and a few other speakers. I looked round and I realized that I had lost my father and my cousin. So I was a bit concerned about that. So what I did was I made my way back down towards the British Army barriers in William Street. I got down there and there was some young people who were throwing stones at the British Army. That was nothing untoward or nothing out of the ordinary at that period in time, because riots would happen almost on a daily basis, but certainly on a weekly basis in that particular area. So I get down there and I couldn't see my father or my cousin. And the next thing, there was a water cannon came on the scene, and they started spraying us with water with dye in it. And I was wearing a white shirt, and my white shirt turned pink as a consequence of being soaked by the water cannon. And there was CS gas was fired as well. And it was a CS gas started to annoy me because I couldn't breathe, and we were tightly squeezed together. So I decided that it was time for me to get out of there and head back to Free Derry Corner and hopefully run into my father and my cousin. I was walking over waste ground in Russell Street. And I don't know what made me, there must have been some noise or something that made me look over my shoulder. And as I looked over my shoulder, I saw paratroopers coming from the direction of Great James's Street, the other side of William Street. And I thought, this is not good. This is bad news. I just knew that intuitively. So I started moving even quicker, picked up my pace and started moving towards Free Derry. Next thing I heard shooting. And I want to pause at this point. The thing is, there's a time and a place for academia to gather the facts, to collate the facts, and to create a totality of a picture of what happened on Bloody Sunday. But the point is, there was no one floating in a hot air balloon over the bog site on that particular day. So what I'm about to tell you is my own story, what I witnessed, what I felt. And the truth of the matter is, it was a very small slice, a microcosm of what actually happened on the day. So I was one of that one microcosm. There was thousands of other people who had the same experience, who, when you glue all our stories together, then you get the totality of what actually happened. So once I heard the shooting, I can't begin to tell you what went through my head at that particular point in time. I started running, and I was running kind of slouched over. You get this feeling that if you slouched over, you'd be less likely to be hit by a bullet. But there was noise. There was a noise of the shooting. There was people screaming. There was just noise, and it was just a cacophony of sound. And as I ran up William Street, there were stone barriers or stone barricades across William Street. And as I ran towards those barriers, I saw people falling. At that point, I had no idea what happened to them. I had no idea if they got up or didn't get up. But as I moved up the street, I saw Barney McGuigan's body lying outside the high flats. Barney had been shot through the eye, going to help someone by those stone barriers that had also been shot. So the fight or flight syndrome had kicked in. And obviously it was the flight syndrome with regards to me. And I was determined to get to Free Derry Corner and over a barricade that was there, a barricade of old cars, and get to relative safety. As I got to the corner, the street that Free Derry Corner was the gable end of was still there at the time. So I got into one of the doorways there and listened to the shooting, and I could see the paratroopers moving about and arresting people. And I just knew it was, I couldn't get out of the doorway. It was bad. I was kind of frozen and kind of not. It's kind of hard to explain, really. But as I was about to leave to get over, when the shooting eased off, and I was about to get over the barricade, there was a lady ran by me, a lady that I thought was fairly elderly. She was probably in her 40s at the time. But as she was going over the barricade, her foot got caught. And I thought, the hell with this. So I got out of the doorway. I went over sprang over the barricade, and I grabbed her. And I knew I was bringing her over the barricade with me, whether she left her foot behind or not. But I got over the barricade, and she thanked me for helping her over. And I still was at a loss, because I knew with the amount of shooting that there was people shot, there was people probably killed. The shooting to me sounded as if it lasted forever, but it didn't. It was over in a few minutes. So I got round the corner, and actually who I ran into at this point was my father. And I said, "Where's Liam?" And he said, "I've no idea where Liam is." So we were really scared for Liam. But when we left the scene, we thought there was 3 people dead. We just had no concept of what actually had happened. But what I'll never forget was that I was on Roswell Street, and logically, Roswell Street was an area where there was a number of people shot there, but logic would have told me to get off Roswell Street earlier and the side street. But little did I know that the paratroopers followed people off Roswell Street into the side streets of Glenfadda Park, and they shot a bunch of people in Glenfadda Park who were trapped. There was kind of cul-de-sacs in Glenfadda Park, and there was a number of people shot there. So I've spoken to some of my friends who were in Glenfadda Park and who actually witnessed the paratroopers doing their dirty work in Glenfadda Park. A neighbor of mine, Jim Ray, who lived just up the street from me, Jim was shot by a paratrooper. And then when the paratrooper saw that he was still alive, he shot him a second time to finish him off. So at that point, everybody was in shock. Everybody was trying to get the wounded in the ambulances. It was just pandemonium at that stage. So I went back to the Brandywell with my father, and then the news started coming in, 5 dead, 6 dead. And it turned out at the end of the day, there was 13 people dead and 15 people wounded. And one of the wounded died a year later of his wounds, Johnny Johnson, who incidentally was shot by the sniper that I had seen on the roof of Stevenson's Bakery. Derry was in shock. Ireland was in shock. We couldn't believe it. But the British propaganda machine swung into action immediately and started spewing lies that everybody who was on the march, who was unarmed and innocent, that they were carrying nail bombs and all sorts of nonsense, and that people unnamed had shot at British soldiers, and the British soldiers responded by shooting people dead. One of the things that sticks in my mind is there was, of all the people that were shot dead and wounded, there was only one female. And she was shot, and because of the fact she was wearing pants, and the soldier that shot her thought he was shooting a male. The British thought that by shooting males in the Bogside on that particular day, that they would somehow or other be shooting IRA people. But they didn't. They murdered innocent civilians. They murdered innocent civilians. And so the bottom line is the paratroopers were sent in to finish the civil rights movement. And they did, they succeeded, because people on that day started to realize that asking nicely for your rights wasn't doing any good. It wasn't yielding any benefits for the Catholic people of the North. The message that came down very clearly to us was, you're not equal to us. You never will be equal. You're not wanted in this neck of the woods. And don't dare think that you're going to get your civil rights or any sort of equality. The impact of Bloody Sunday never really, truly hit me until it was time for the funerals. And seeing all those coffins lying out in a row in St. Mary's Church in the Craigan just hit me. The enormity of the event hit me. I was there on the day, but I had no idea of the scale of the butchery that occurred on Bloody Sunday. But when I saw those 13 coffins laid out in St. Mary's Church, it somehow really resonated with me that just how horrible the event was. It was a rainy day, the day of the funerals. And it just seemed as if the heavens had opened up. And it sounds corny, but it feels as if, it really felt as if the sky was crying for us. The sky was crying for us on that particular day. And we buried our neighbors, we buried our friends. And we did so with sadness. Sadness because we were a tight community and we knew our neighbors and we knew our friends. And this just hurt us all individually as well as collectively. I can't even begin to think of how the relatives of the men that were killed in Bloody Sunday felt at the time and how they were made to feel afterwards, because I know how it made me feel. The salt that was rubbed in the wound was rubbed in by the Woodgery Tribunal, which the British government appointed. And that tribunal, which was a farce, it was an insult to the people of Derry and to all the nationalist people in the North, found the paratroopers not guilty of anything of consequence. I think the worst thing the Woodgery said was the actions of the paratroopers bordered on the reckless. What the hell does that mean? They murdered our people. They murdered us without thinking about it, without any second thought. And then worse than that, the Queen gave Colonel Guilford a medal. So he was given a medal for killing innocent Catholics. I know with the Rosary Tribunal and subsequently with the Savile Tribunal, the focus was on the paratroopers. But the truth of the matter is, there was people further up the food chain in the government who gave approval for what happened in Bloody Sunday. Brigadier General Frank Kitchen, I want to talk about him for a minute. He was a main counterinsurgency theorist for the British Army. And he had a special relationship with the paratroopers, particularly with the support company of the paratroopers. And he was somebody that wrote a book called Low Intensity Counterinsurgency Operations. And he was involved in all sorts of dirty tricks. And he masterminded what happened in Ballymurphy. There's no shadow of a doubt in my mind about that. And he masterminded what happened in Bloody Sunday. Guilford ignored orders from Brigadier Pat McClellan, the main British officer in charge of Derry. And the reason that Wolford felt comfortable ignoring those orders was he knew he had the backing and the approval of that same general. God, it's hard thinking about this without going back to the day, going back to the events of that time. So that was the wizardry, salt in our wounds. In 2010, we had the report of the Savile Commission, which found the paratroopers guilty of murder, which vindicated the relatives of those that were shot in Bloody Sunday by saying that they were unarmed and that they were innocent. And the British Prime Minister apologized in the House of Parliament, Cameron. The point that the question that's got to be asked is, so is an apology justice? And I don't think it's justice. They charged Soldier F, and that is still ongoing. There's nothing has come about as a result of Soldier F. The Ballymurphy people got an apology. The Prime Minister wouldn't do it. He had a member of his cabinet apologize on his behalf. But there's a lot of things, frankly, other than Bloody Sunday that the British government has to ask for. There was many Bloody Sundays in the north of Ireland. Bloody Sundays that were smaller in scale, but still the same thing. People were killed by loyalist paramilitaries in collusion with British military intelligence, in collusion with the RUC. They were killed one at a time and two at a time. You had the bombings in Monaghan and Dublin which was done in collusion with British military intelligence. So what justice has there been for those people? The Glenanne killings, the list goes on and on. Our people were slaughtered. They were slaughtered with the cooperation of British intelligence, with the approval of the British government. And now the British government is trying to stifle meaningful investigations into all those events. And again, the message comes through real strongly that we were not worth anything. Catholics had no worth. Nationalists had no worth. Republicans had no worth. There was a subgroup of people, and I just want to reach out to them and just thank them here in the United States. There's men and women who showed up, men from the AOH and men who weren't in the AOH, women from the LAOH, and just regular people who were incensed by the denial of civil rights. Women who showed up week in, week out, in the heat of summer and the cold of winter. They protest at the British Embassy. They protest in St. Louis, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, New York, who kept the flame alive and who supported the families of Bloody Sunday and who supported the families of all those people in the North that were butchered. So why are we remembering Bloody Sunday today? Well, I remember the expression, it's a truism, that none of us truly die. Or we die twice. And the second time we die is when the last person utters their name. And the point is, we are keeping the memories of the people of Bloody Sunday alive by talking about the event. We're speaking about Irish history. We're speaking about a history that stretches back over hundreds of years, but it was the same thing over and over, where we were butchered with no sign of remorse from the butchers that killed us. So there's still a message of hope, and I'm going to tell you what the message of hope is. We resisted. We didn't accept it quietly. We resisted and we spoke out. Over here in the States, those men and women that spoke out counteracted the British propaganda machine, a propaganda machine that spewed lies on a daily basis, a propaganda machine that had millions of pounds supporting it. Here in the States, the only thing that we had was our determination, our consistency, and the message that we were getting out there in the face of what the British were saying. The people in the United States, our people here, were in lockstep with our people that were suffering in the north of Ireland. Long Kesh, the H blocks of Long Kesh and the horrible events that occurred there that led to the hunger strike, the dirty protest, our women in Armagh jail, our men in jails in England who were horribly abused. Oppression is what was our lot. That's what we had to tolerate, but it's also what we had to fight against. And the truth of the matter is, the situation has changed because of the fact that we didn't suffer in silence, because of the fact that we resisted. Two generations ago, we were digging ditches. And today, our children are doctors and pharmacists. No longer are we subjected to the denial of education. We've got education. We've demanded our rights. And we can stand tall and proud in that matter. I remember the words of Bobby Sands. He said, our revenge will be the laughter of our children. And that is true. That is so true. So we don't know where we're going and we don't know where we've come from. And I hope that this webinar today gives those, especially those who were kind of shaky on the facts of the situation in the North, I hope it gives you some clue into where we're coming from. And it gives us some idea where we're going. I think that the rise of Sinn Féin is one example of how the situation has changed in the North, how the situation has changed in Ireland. The unionist hegemony in the north of Ireland is about to topple. They're not in the majority anymore. The fact is, we are in a situation where we're getting close to where we can vote them. We can vote away the division, vote away the border, we can break it down. Because the truth of the matter is, and we said this from day one, from Bloody Sunday, we said there never would be peace, or there never would be justice until we did away with the border. So the idea of achieving peace with justice will not occur until that border disappears. How am I for time, Sandy?
I think we're okay. We've got a few questions. Are you ready for some questions?
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll gladly answer any questions as well as I can.
Okay, let me go back. One of the first questions was, did this horrendous treatment of Catholics reach beyond Belfast?
Well, it reached beyond,
Particularly Donegal.
well, it reached, particularly where?
Donegal.
Well, you know, the truth of the matter is, the Troubles in general touched Donegal because Donegal was a border county. So, for example, during the Battle of the Bogside in 1869, when people, for fear of their life, took their children across the border for safety, of course, that impacted the people in Donegal there. Donegal was part of natural hinterland for Derry for economics and so forth. So in terms of when they come across the border to shop, they would suffer the same harassment by British patrols, by British checkpoints that we suffered on a daily basis. And I think to a certain extent, it impacted Donegal too politically. Neil Blaney, who was an independent Fianna Fáil TD, he got into trouble because he got involved as a result of the situation in the north with buying arms and shipping them to the north. So there was a lot of ramifications for the people of Donegal. But the truth of the matter is, the greatest ramifications of all were for the people of Derry and Belfast and Armagh and Newry and all the nationalist enclaves, Republican enclaves in the north.
Okay, thank you. We have another question here. What is the difference between the nationalists and the Republicans?
Well, if you look at it this way, if you regard that as a spectrum, nationalism was not a particularly well-developed political ethos. It was just basically they subscribed to the idea of United Ireland. Republican philosophy was a lot more developed and had various elements to it. And for example, non-sectarian, certainly do away with the border, the equality of everyone participating as equals. the removal of the British presence in Ireland totally, the breakdown of the colonial apparatus. Excuse me. So, like Sinn Féin would be representative of the Republican philosophy as opposed to the nationalist philosophy. Nationalism would be like a subset of republicanism. Republicanism would be more well developed.
Okay, Martin Galvin.
We'd like to recognize Martin Galvin. He's the FFAI chair of the AOH. So Martin, please unmute yourself.
Listen, Matt, I really appreciate your presentation. I asked to go on. I have to leave at 12. Two things. Number one, we're happy that the AOH also supports you in terms of getting all the things that you were promised in 1997 as a deportee here, and hope we get a better job of doing that. But the main thing, yesterday there was a report into collusion in South Derry. It showed that 19 people were killed and illustrated a number of ways in which there were collusive behavior. British allowed the arms to go through. They gave agents, they paid agents who committed murders. It didn't interfere. They didn't arrest people. They destroyed evidence, all of that. Do you think the real meaning of that report yesterday is that Bloody Sunday, they used British troops, it was bad politically, so after that in South Derry and Tyrone and elsewhere, they just used loyalist proxies and thought by using collusion they could get away with it politically?
That
and
is correct.
That's the only change.
You're correct, Martin. But that makes the British no less guilty for the way that they handled it, using proxies or doing it themselves. And remember this, the SAS didn't go away. The SAS was still hired killers for the British government. They were still killing people. In fact, let me bring up a case. I had a friend from Lancash, a guy, it wasn't, Shamie Grew was his name. He's from Armagh. And Shamie Grew and a friend of his, Roddy Carroll, his brother, was in Lancash as well, happened to be driving through a British Army checkpoint. And Shamie Grew was shot, I think, 36 times. Now, the British were saying that he tried to drive through the checkpoint. But when the coroner's report came out, all the rounds were fired from a distance of less than 24 inches. And the coroner said the car was stationary. So again, it's that repetitious quality of what would happen. The British would kill people, and then they would spew out a whole slew of lies that cover the murder. So no, I agree with you, Martin. You're absolutely correct.
The AOH is going to mark the anniversary weekend of Bloody Sunday. Since we can't go there, as myself and Dolores and so many others had planned, we're going to have a webinar 2 weeks from today, beginning at 11 o'clock, on that report that came out yesterday, British collusion with loyalists in the murder of 16 people. And I'll bring up the same themes as you. And Matt, I want to thank you for this. You can tell how emotional it is so many years later. And I know this was very difficult for you, and you've done a tremendous job. And I commend the LAOH for putting this on and having such a good speaker and a good program.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Marilyn Madigan, and I'm the chair of the Embracing Our Heritage, and I'm also the national vice president. And I'm proud to say that we have on this call both of the Agent Order 5 Hibernian president, Daniel O'Connell, and the LAOH president, Karen Keene, and the FFAI chair, Dolores Desch. So at this time, I'm going to introduce Danny. Unmute yourself, Danny.
That always helps. Thank you, Maryland, and for having us on. And Martin, obviously, and Dolores are the ones that speak for the AOH and the LAOH on this topic, Matt. And it's a wonderful to see you. It's every time I hear you speak about this, it's an emotional thing, not just for you, but everybody, the hundreds of people on this video here today, and taking the time 50 years later and seeing how it, when we hear you speak of it, it's like it happened yesterday. And one of sitting here in America, I mean, I really see Bloody Sunday as the day that the troubles, as we refer to them, ignited. You talked about the Battle of the Bogside. You talked about Ballymurphy, who we work with very closely as well, and now Bloody Sunday. And I think for all our guests on this video, the understanding that this was a peaceful protest. Ballymurphy, the people were just going through life, and the British began the troubles. And a very unfortunate time, but we got to remember the British chose to go to Ballymurphy and shoot those people, and they chose to come to Derry and create this violence. And Matt, just from that, if you could just touch on that briefly, and I'm going to get off right after this. We have a call at noon, but this was an incredible webinar, and I'd recommend to everybody immediately share the YouTube link with all your friends. But go ahead, Matt. Good hearing from you.
Thanks. Well, the commonality that existed between Ballymurphy and Bloody Sunday was the 1st Battalion of the Parachute Regiment. That the paratroopers murdered those people in Ballymurphy, and it was almost like a practice run for Bloody Sunday. And I mean, you can go behind the scenes. Talked about Brigadier General Frank Kitson, Colonel Derek Wolford, and that would be equally true. And the fact that we've hunted down everyone except the people that need to be hunted down, and that's those in government, those further up the food chain who approved the actions of the paratroopers.
You're right, Matt. Thank you. Thank you. Great job. We know how difficult this is, but this educating people from around the world is so helpful. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Danny, for having the AOH officers on our call. We really do appreciate it. And at this time, I'm going to introduce our national president, Karen Keene.
Good afternoon, everyone. And again, thank you, my brother, National President Danny O'Connell, for your continuing support. Just to say that we work very well with our brothers on trying to bring a unified Ireland in the way that the Irish people wanted to happen. And another thing is, this is a civil rights issue. And so many things, we're hearing this from Matt on a personal level, his experience, and it's heart-wrenching to hear that someone we know, and any person in what we would call the first world, is going through this. But basic civil rights are a problem for all of us. And in 2 weeks, our political education committee will be having someone on to talk about civil rights here in the United States. And I ask you to please to join in on that. But I do want to thank Matt and just say, it's so hard for me as a woman born and raised in New York, even though it was tough, to have the military of basically another country or an occupied country, country occupying us, I should say, and have them taking out machine guns or sniper rifles and shooting up our citizens, our people, in what was a peaceful protest. And we're not talking about something that happened 200 years ago. We're talking about history. People saw this just happening right in front of them, and you're powerless and you're emotionless because most people don't walk around carrying a sniper rifle to shoot somebody back. And the way that it scarred you and all of the people of Derry is something that we have to make sure never happens again. So I just want to now introduce my friend Mochara, our National Freedom for All Ireland person, Dolores Desch. And Dolores has educated and inspired so many of us women on the side of the LAOH to become more active in these issues. And we are so blessed to have her and all her energy and knowledge working with the LAOH across the country and with our brothers in the AOH. Dolores?
Oh, thank you very much, President Keene. First of all, I want to thank Matt for being here today. I also want to thank Marilyn for doing such a great job with her team on this webinar. It's absolutely fantastic. But to go back to some of the things that Matt was talking about, Para One was brought in for a reason. They were brought in because Derry was a threat to the British government. Derry was a threat because the people there were not standing down and they were marching for civil rights. They were taking the legitimate way. They had also had journalists there. And that was the saving grace of that march, because that march was recorded. It was recorded, and now we have the films of what happened. But make no mistake, this was deliberate, like Matt said. This was calculated to send in their most brutal force to quell the people that were trying to make change, that were trying to make a difference, fighting against internment, fighting against having your children and your husbands rounded up and put behind wires, behind barbed wire, I should say, without any kind of trial. The people were fighting for that. That's all they were marching for. And to break the people was what the British aim was. If you look at who was shot, there were 6 children. They were 17 years old, shot and killed. What does that say about the government? That was just unacceptable. It just kept going on and on. And what the people didn't know back then, none of us knew, was this was going to continue to happen year after year after year. And the trauma that was inflicted by these troops, you can see it when Matt talks, it doesn't leave them. And the only thing we can do right now is to help families, help them by supporting groups like Relatives for Justice, which we do through Freedom for All Ireland, and helping groups like the Pat Finucane Center, and funding the Free Derry Museum, because they have a great exhibit there of all the artifacts of what happened, film clips, coats where you can see the bullet holes are in the back of the jacket. And, you know, it's just a testament to what happened. We wish we could be there at the end of this month. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, we can't. We stand in solidarity with the people of Derry. And, you know, I just want to say that, Matt, you know, Karen talks about inspiring. I was inspired by you when you came to our convention about 6 or 7 years ago. And we said, can you please speak to our committee? Our ladies in our committee want to hear what you have to say. And you told us a story about how the troops would come in down the street with their sledgehammers, break down doors, and how they came into your home and they dragged your granny out of bed and grabbed her by her ankles and pulled her down the stairs. And the trauma inflicted on the families just kept, you were one of hundreds that this happened to, and the children. And that was the legacy of the Army at that time. That's how people viewed the Army. They were terrorists. They would come in and they would destroy everything. And that vision, we heard that and we said, Matt, there's only 50 of us in this room. You have to bring this to the rest of our ladies. And he agreed. You relived that again a few hours later. He told our whole delegation, and there was not a dry eye in the room. And these witness reports are so important because people do not understand. That was a pivotal moment for the LAOH Freedom for All Ireland campaign, because we started to see our ladies understand that this was not something that didn't affect the children and the women. This affected the whole community. And the ladies started to get much more involved when they heard from you. So you inspire us with your story. I thank you so much for being here today. Our ladies are 100% engaged in Freedom for All Ireland now. We've continually ramped up our energy in this area. And, you know, if we were over there in 2 weeks, we would have had about 15 women from the LAOH at least on that bus. So I thank you so much for being here today. I thank Marilyn for bringing this to us, and President Keene for her leadership in getting us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dolores. And I just have to thank Matt personally for sharing his story. This was a difficult story to share, but it was one that I think everyone on this call appreciated. Your commitment to Matt, to us, to share this story that needs to be shared, and everyone needs to tell others about it. This happened 50 years ago, but these families and other families still need justice. And that's why it's important that the AOH and LAOH take a stand with our Freedom for All Ireland. And I am disappointed that I will not be in Derry personally to participate in the march. And when we started this webinar plan, we wanted to remember this tragic day. And Matt, we cannot thank you enough for sharing your personal recollections of this horrendous day
Thank
in
you.
the history of the world. At this time, we still do have a few more questions, so I'm going to turn it back to Sandy for the questions. And please, everyone, visit our website, follow our Freedom for All Ireland, follow our Embracing Our Heritage. And thanks to the Irish government for allowing a program like this to be able to be produced. Thank you.
Thank you, Marilyn. We've had several questions asking what happened to Liam and how old, well, first, how old were you and what happened to Liam?
Well, I was 16. Actually, I'll tell you an interesting story about Liam. And this speaks to the trauma of the day. I was talking to Liam after the event, and I asked him, what was it that he remembered on the day? He told me that he remembered nothing, which shocked me, but again, that was the trauma of the day. And actually, I got to understand the real meaning of post-traumatic stress syndrome when I was the director of the only freestanding psychiatric emergency room in Eastern Missouri. But I got to understand the measure of PTSD. And obviously his brain as a coping mechanism had eradicated every single memory of Bloody Sunday. Where he couldn't remember. So that's the trauma of the day. And it makes me wonder how many other people that were there that day had similar experiences. You know, when I used to think about Bloody Sunday, I felt as if it was watching a videotape of somebody else, that I wasn't actually in the picture. I wasn't actually there. And a psychologist friend of mine told me that's a classic example of PTSD. I remember in a separate conversation on a different issue with Jerry Kelly, who's an MLA for Sinn Féin in Belfast. Jerry Kelly made the point to me, he says, Matt, he said, there's none of us have not been touched by all of the events that we've experienced over the years. And we're all, I think the word he used was, we're all hurting children. But the one thing I want to say also, in case I forget, it's really important that I stress that I was a microcosm. I was one tiny person there on Bloody Sunday, but there's thousands of others who have their memories of Bloody Sunday as well that are equally important. In fact, maybe more important even in my memories. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you, Matt. Another question is, could you tell us more about the types of discrimination that Catholics/Republicans were exposed to?
Well, if you, this will be kind of repetitious, but if you look back at, we lived in the Brandywell. And I think I made the point, I was speaking at Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland one time, and we knew, we didn't realize that we were poor, even though we were poor, because in a lot of the houses, well, there was two families living in a 2-bedroom house. We had no hot water, no indoor water, outside toilets. When we could find work, it was normally for women who worked in the shirt factories. The men had to go to England or further abroad for work. But there was a kind of normality attached to that. that our parents accepted that we really were not very inclined to accept. I remember my father going for a job interview one time. And the employer was required by the government to write down the reason why he didn't give the job to this applicant. And my father came home with a pink slip with 2 letters on the application, RC, Roman Catholic. And I'll make another point in that regard. You see advertisements that were posted for jobs. It was legal for the employer to post on the advertisement in the newspaper, no Roman Catholics need apply. So if that reminded me of anything, it reminds me of what it was like in the United States for Blacks in the southern states. That was just accepted as normal. It wasn't normal, but that was the normality that we lived in. I talked about the voting rights. My parents were disenfranchised. My aunt was disenfranchised. And actually, ironically, the Unionist government and Stormont actually disenfranchised some of its own people so that they could disenfranchise more Catholics. That's what it was like. And then we had the Orange Order, who made discrimination work on a daily basis. And then they would have triumphalist parades. So it wasn't enough that they discriminated against us, but they had to publicly show the level of the discrimination. So if you were a Catholic, they regarded you almost like a Satanist. And I don't think that's an exaggeration. They regarded us like Satanists. They regarded us as less than equal. We were second-class citizens. And I don't know if that explains to you what the information that you're looking for.
Okay, we just have a couple questions left. Two people have asked, does NORAID still exist?
I don't believe so. If it does, I'm not aware of it. NORAID, and they did a lot of good work with regards to the North, and I'll acknowledge that. But I really don't know. There's a lot of other people who are better placed to answer that.
Okay. This one said, thank you for sharing your story. It's very moving. How do you feel Brexit and the current negotiations about the protocol are influencing the current situation in Ireland? And do you believe there will ever be a united Ireland?
Well, of course, I believe there's going to be a united Ireland. Because at the end of all the suffering that we went through, all the horrendous things that we experienced, we still had to cling to the hope that we would get what we were looking, which would be a unitary state, which a united Ireland, and that we would have equality within that state, where everybody would have equality. Even the people that oppressed us from the loyalist community would be welcomed and embraced within that state.
Okay, that wraps up our questions. Marilyn, I'm going to give it back to you.
Thank you again, Matt. Thank you, Sandy, for asking those important questions. Also was recorded live on our LAOH National YouTube. Please share this. We want to get this story out, and these families in the North all get justice, get answers for what really happened. The British government needs to accept responsibility for shooting at innocent people. Please check our LAOH national website, follow our Freedom for All Ireland, and follow our Embracing Our Heritage program. And thank you everyone for your participation. This concludes our event. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. How did I do?